When someone has come to a horrific end at the hands of another person, we want to find who did it and bring justice for the victim, but this can be greatly complicated when we don't even know the victim's name or where they've come from. This is the case of Sam Doe, also known as Septic Tank Sam. Before we begin today's case, I would just like to remind you that if you have a case suggestion, please use the form linked in the description box down below. Down there, you will also find contact information and relevant case IDs and more. Now, in case you guys weren't aware, I like to share other people's coverage of the cases I discuss, and I always try to link back to a couple of other videos and podcasts that have covered these cases. You guys can always find those links in the description box as well. In addition to all of that, I always pin my sources for the videos to the top of the comments section, so you can always look back at my sources, see them for yourselves, and come to your own conclusions. Now, with that all out of the way, let's move on to today's case. Now, it was on April 13th of 1977 when Charlie McLeod was working on installing a new septic tank on his property. Now, he needed a working pump, and rather than purchasing a new one, Charlie decided to retrieve a working pump from an old septic tank on his property, which was situated near a rundown building. Now, after removing the lid to the old septic tank, Charlie discovered a sock, followed by a shoe at the top of the liquid inside. Charlie realized that someone must be inside the septic tank and immediately went to the local RCMP station to report his discovery. Now, the two officers arrived and they began to use an ice cream pail to scoop the liquid out of the tank. It took 6 hours to remove the remains from the septic tank. It was obvious to officers that a large amount of lime had been put into the tank as an attempt to speed the decomposition of the body. When the remains were pulled from the tank, they were unable to tell if they were male or female due to decomposition and the mutilation. The remains were taken to the medical examiner's office in Edmonton, and eventually forensic pathologists were able to determine that the doe was indeed male. More disturbingly, they also uncovered the atrocities that their John Doe had suffered leading up to his death. The man had been tied up and beaten, tortured with a small butane torch, and then sexually mutilated. He was then shot in the head and chest. Investigators believe that the man had been tied down, likely to a bed, at the time of the torture. The scorch marks on the clothing that had been on the remains stopped at the wrist. Officers believed this was because of the ties restraining the man. In addition, it was likely that the yellow sheet the remains had been wrapped in had been on the bed that the man had been restrained to during this whole ordeal. Over time, the John Doe picked up the nickname of Septic Tank Sam from investigators who had been working on the case for years. Today, however, many web sleuths have opted to refer to him as Sam Doe to show a greater level of respect for the man who had been brutally murdered and hidden in a septic tank. At the time that the remains were discovered, there were no matching missing persons reports for Sam Doe. This led investigators to believe that the man may not have been local or didn't have close friends or family in the area who would have reported him missing. Officers released a description of the man's clothing to newspapers in the hopes that it would drum up some leads. The clothing included a pair of blue jeans, a blue jean Levi brand shirt with snap-style buttons, a white t-shirt, gray wool socks, and a brown pair of imitation wallaby shoes. Now, the style of the man's clothes led many to believe that he could have been working as a farm laborer or a construction worker. This, paired with the fact that there didn't seem to be any local missing persons reports for the man, led investigators to believe that the man could have been traveling and following work wherever it took him. He may have been from another province entirely. He could have also been a drifter who simply moved around from town to town, picking up odd jobs when he needed to before moving on once again. In addition to releasing information about the victim's clothing, officers released dental information about Sam Doe to every dentist office in the province of Alberta. They requested that every office compare the information to their records for a potential dental match, but no match ever came in. Now, another detail that investigators and locals honed in on was the tank. The use of the old septic tank led many locals to believe that the murderer was also local. The tank was connected to a rundown building which had been abandoned. A local would have most likely known that the tank wasn't being used and that it would go unchecked. It was only by chance that Charlie had decided to use the working pump from the old tank, rather than purchase a new one for the new tank. If Charlie hadn't done this, it's likely that Sam Doe would have continued to go undiscovered. There is also no indication that Sam Doe had been murdered near the tank or even in the abandoned building nearby. During the investigation into Sam Doe's death, there were a couple of people who confessed to the murder, but officers were able to determine that these confessions were false. Eventually, the case went cold and Sam Doe was buried in an unmarked grave in Edmonton Cemetery. In 1979, an officer had the remains exhumed and took some of them to a man named Dr. Snow in the United States. Dr. Snow had become proficient in analyzing skeletal remains and had been helping officers since 1960 to determine sex, age range, race, and stature from skeletal remains. In 1967, Betty Gatliff joined the team to help recreate the looks of the victims from their skulls. This was the first time that Sam Doe would be given a face. During their work, Dr. Snow determined that Sam Doe was likely native and around 35 years old. In 1983, it was revealed that Sam Doe had likely been in the septic tank for as long as a year before his discovery, which was a correction to the previous timeline investigators had been working with. Prior to this, they had believed that Sam Doe had been in the tank for up to 6 months. This is also when officers released the information of Sam Doe having been wrapped in a yellow bedsheet and having been tied up with nylon rope. Now, in 1995, another facial reconstruction was done for Sam Doe, this time utilizing computer technology to recreate an image of what Sam Doe likely looked like. Then in 2000, Sam Doe's remains were exhumed again so that another reconstruction could be completed. During this exhumation, DNA was also obtained for Sam Doe. Now, in an interview in 2017, one of the original officers to have pulled Sam Doe from the septic tank said that he believed that the identity may never be found. He stated that the case is just too old and the chances of solving it are sparse. He also stated that through the years, the investigating department has spent at least $1 million on searching for Sam Doe's identity and killer. There are 2 full cabinets dedicated to Sam Doe's case in the Tofield RCMP detachment. Now, there have been many theories about Sam Doe's case. Some believe that the killer had likely done this sort of crime before, and therefore may have been a serial killer or someone involved in organized crime or gang activity. Many also wondered if Sam was killed because he was Native. This is unfortunately not an uncommon thing in Canada. Not only are Indigenous people more likely to be targeted, their cases are also more likely to go unsolved. Now, others have theorized that Sam Doe may have actually been a predator. Perhaps he had sexually assaulted someone and revenge was taken upon him, accounting for the level of brutality and sexual mutilation of his body prior to death. Another theory postulates that Sam Doe could have been sleeping with another man's wife. The husband found out and decided to put a violent end to the affair. Now, whatever theory may be correct, we will likely never know unless Sam Doe is identified and his killer is caught. Now, long since the discovery of Sam Doe, the area that had contained the old septic tank has been built over. A subdivision now stands over the place where Sam Doe had been hidden for likely a year before his discovery. Though the septic tank is no longer there, investigators do still have one important thing that may help bring answers in the case: Sam Doe's DNA. In 2016, legislation was passed to create a DNA index that could be used to compile DNA profiles to help with the identification of human remains and missing persons. The program includes an index for the DNA of missing persons, an index for the DNA of human remains that have been found, and an index where relatives of missing loved ones can voluntarily submit DNA in the hopes of a familial match for a missing loved one. The program was officially launched on March 12th of 2018. It seems at this time the database has helped to solve 6 investigations and is likely to continue helping officers solve the cases of missing and unidentified persons. Now, most recently in June of this year, 2020, the remains of Cheyenne Partridge, who had gone missing from Edmonton, Alberta in 2016, were identified by use of the database. Currently, the database contains around 500,000 DNA profiles, and many continue to hope that this database will eventually help to solve the identity of Sam Doe. Now, over the years of investigating the Sam Doe case, investigators' approximations of what Sam Doe looked like have varied slightly. Today, the consensus seems to be that Sam Doe was between 26 and 40 years old, was most likely Native American, and was between 5 feet 5 inches tall and 5 feet 7 inches tall. Sam Doe likely weighed between 145 and 165 pounds. He had brown-colored hair, and his eye color is unknown. He had a medium build, was right-handed, and he likely suffered from a severe illness around the age of 5. The dental records for Sam Doe's remains are on file, including information about his teeth, fillings, and other recent dental work prior to his death. And as we already discussed, Sam Doe's DNA is on file as well. Now, at the time of his death, Sam Doe was wearing blue jeans, a blue jean Levi brand shirt with snap buttons, a white t-shirt, gray wool socks, and brown imitation wallaby shoes. For full transparency, Doe Network has listed the t-shirt as being gray, but according to news articles from local newspapers, the shirt was white. So just keep that possibility in mind. Now, if you have any information related to Sam Doe's identity or the identity of his killer, please contact the Tofield RCMP at 780-662-3353. There will be further contact information in the description box down below. So what are your thoughts on this case? This is one that I found disturbing. The amount of violence involved, the brutality of it all, it really seemed to get to me. I originally saw this case covered by Kaylee Elise, but as her channel no longer exists, I'm happy to be able to cover it as well and keep the story out there in people's minds. Hopefully one day it will be solved. But let me know what your thoughts are about this case in the comments down below. As always though, please remember to stay respectful. You can also help me to keep these cases in the public eye by sharing, liking, or commenting. Share this video or someone else's or any of the sources that I've provided for you guys down below. And thank you so much for watching today's case, and I will see you all again very soon for another.